Hello, everyone. Let me begin by welcoming the Pacific Island leaders participating today, and thanks to the East-West Center for being our virtual host. The United States' relationship with each of your nations is distinct, but all of those relationships are rooted in common interests and values, including our belief in democracy and human rights, and a free and open Pacific. And these days, they're also rooted in some significant shared challenges that we have to confront together. One is the reason we're meeting on screens rather than in person: COVID-19. I know the pandemic has had a devastating impact on the islands, in lives lost, in economies battered, and that vaccinating people in your countries is a top priority. As of last month, the United States had provided the freely associated states of Palau, the Federated States of Micronesia, and the Marshall Islands with enough COVID-19 vaccines to vaccinate their entire populations. But we know we must do more to help Pacific Islands. That's why the United States contributed $2 billion to COVAX and pledged an additional $2 billion through 2022 to encourage other donors to increase their contributions. COVAX has supplied more than 285,000 vaccine doses to Papua New Guinea, the Solomon Islands, Fiji, Samoa, Tonga, and Tuvalu. It's also why President Biden announced that the United States will donate 80 million vaccines from our own supply by the end of June, and continue to donate excess vaccines from our supply as they become available. We're also working to increase global supply through the Quad and supporting a waiver to intellectual property protections for COVID-19 vaccines. Across these efforts, we will ensure vaccines are delivered in a way that's equitable and is driven by need and science, not politics or favors. But it's not enough to end the pandemic. We also have to rebuild the island economies and livelihoods that have been ravaged by the loss of tourism and the skyrocketing cost of imports. The United States is committed to helping you recover, and doing so in a way that's sustainable and inclusive. We're redoubling efforts started before the pandemic, and finding new ones to invest in, from large-scale infrastructure projects like the Papua New Guinea Electrification Partnership, to grassroots efforts like empowering women entrepreneurs in the Marshall Islands. President Biden's newly launched SALPI initiative gives us an additional tool to strengthen economic cooperation. The climate crisis poses another grave threat, which is existential for the islands. Its impact is already being felt in more frequent and severe storms and rising sea levels. Just 5 to 10 centimeters of sea level rise will have catastrophic consequences for low-lying atoll countries like the Marshall Islands, Kiribati, and Tuvalu. The only way to prevent a climate catastrophe is getting all countries, particularly the biggest emitters, to swiftly and dramatically reduce emissions. That was the purpose of the Leaders' Summit that President Biden convened in April, where President Kabua put it well. Too often, countries hear the excuse that steep emission cuts are too costly, but political signals, especially from the major economies, shape decisions on investment and innovation for low-carbon pathways. We're out of time for excuses. Countries must make and meet ambitious commitments. And governments need to invest in the climate adaptation measures that all our communities will need to make. The United States is leading by example on this front. At the summit, President Biden set out targets to reduce U.S. emissions by at least half by 2030, and we intend to double our public climate funding and triple adaptation funding by 2024. We see these investments as more than just a chance to increase adaptability. They're also a once-in-generations opportunity to create sustainable, good-paying jobs for people in the United States and in the Pacific Islands. A third area where we face a shared challenge is in threats to the rules-based international order. Economic coercion across the region is on the rise. The United States is all for more development and investment in the islands. But that investment should adhere to international standards for environmentally and socially sustainable development and should be pursued transparently with public consultation. And every country, no matter its size, should always be able to make choices without fear of retribution. We're stronger when we stand together on this, and that includes standing with our allies and partners in the region. The same is true when it comes to protecting the marine domain and ensuring that the island's natural resources benefit their own people. These are serious challenges. But let me close with something that gives me great hope. Pacific Islands' rising leaders. That includes the hundreds of young people who have taken part in the Young Pacific Leaders since 2013. One of those is Nicole Yamase. A few months ago, Nicole became the first Pacific Islander, and only the third woman in history, to visit Challenger Deep, 11 kilometers beneath the sea. She carried with her a Federated States of Micronesia flag, a traditional shell necklace, and a small model wooden canoe, mementos of where she is from and her heritage. Nicole, who's now pursuing a PhD at the University of Hawaii, said she hoped the journey would inspire fellow Pacific Islander women who were too long told they had to stay on the shore to pursue careers in science and other path-breaking fields. Nicole said, and I quote, "We belong on shore, we belong all the way at the bottom, and everywhere in between too." I'm convinced that with rising leaders like Nicole, and with our sustained commitment to confronting these challenges together, there's nothing we cannot overcome.